And so joining us now to discuss all of these latest developments are Dan Feferman, co-editor of Middle East 24, and Brigadier General Relik Shafir, former Air Force Base Commander. Thank you both for joining us. So a lot of news happening over the weekend and today. Let's start, of course, with the Islamic Republic of Iran. So in a surprise really to nobody, the Islamic regime has violated the ceasefire. President Trump and the U.S. finally responding. So Dan, let's start with you. What do you make of these latest escalation, and will this likely cause a return to war?
Yeah, I think as you said it right. Nobody's surprised by this, and nobody should be surprised by this. The Islamic Republic in Iran is trying to get away with a deal that'll save its skin, that'll give it breathing space. It was under tremendous amount of military and economic pressure, which it refused to admit, but that's really what brought it to the table. And the key thing here is, they thought and they think there are elements within the regime that think that they can keep pushing back and raising the costs on President Trump. They sense a sort of a desperation to end this, to wrap this up. They know that the World Cup is happening in the United States as we speak. There was a lot of pressure on global oil prices. And so they sense a President Trump who's desperate to climb out of this tree that he got himself into, and that if they can go back and press against the United States and against the Gulf Arab states, then President Trump will capitulate and kind of walk his way out of the deal. So here it's critical that the United States show that it is willing to go back to a military conflict, whether a limited one or a fuller one. And essentially the last thing I'll say on this is the entire conflict has essentially been that Iran has been willing to take more punishment than the United States has been willing to dish out, the United States and Israel. And the key is to not let Iran get confused that it holds the keys to the escalation ladder here.
Well, maybe more than the U.S. is willing to dish out. Not sure if more than Israel is willing to dish out. Relik, turning to you, we just heard Dan's analysis. I mean, I want to understand from you as well what you make of this latest escalation and whether it could cause a return to war.
I think the Iranians who, as President Trump said, had never won a war and never lost a negotiation, are actually following Henry Kissinger's strategy that was shown in Vietnam let's say, 50 years ago, that during the conversations and during the dialogue, there's fire, and each side is trying to arm wrest or rest out the other through different types of pressure. And so the Iranians want to improve their condition. And I think basically they may give in on the nuclear front as long as they don't have to give in on the proxy front, the ballistic missiles and supporting terror. So they will try to tire the United States, knowing very well that the upcoming elections in November are crucial for President Trump, and he will not want a large-scale confrontation until that time. So they will push as much as they can with this push and shove strategy. And Lebanon is part and parcel of that push and shove, as is Yemen. So I guess we'll see that coming up, going up and down along the way, and we have to grit our teeth because Hezbollah are part of the game, and they will fire at will when and if they can in Lebanon, in the southern part of Lebanon, and we should expect more of this at least until November.
Mm-hmm. And Dan, back to you. President Trump, in his Truth Social post, once again making threats that he would finish the job, saying that the Islamic Republic would no longer exist. Now, it's interesting because it's almost an admittance that he's offering this regime a lifeline to salvage the regime, and that technically he could go back and actually bring this regime down. But, these are just more threats coming from President Trump. On the side of the Iranians, are they even taking these threats seriously?
There are some people certainly taking the threats seriously, but they know that Trump is not going to demolish the country. They know that the Americans would not go after civilian infrastructure. That's what I meant when I said, the Iranians are willing to take more punishment than the Americans are willing to dish out. America has the strongest military in the world, can wipe out all of the state infrastructure, all of the economic infrastructure, the oil, the energy infrastructure, and it's unwilling to do so because at the end of the day, the United States does not seek Iran's destruction. It seeks at most and into this regime and at least a severe limitation to the nuclear program. And so there's a mismatch in, again, how much Iran is willing to take here. There are also a lot of elements within this regime that are messianic, that thrive off of war and escalation, and that have this religious, fanatical assuredness to their purpose. And they see every time that the Americans are willing to back down, that they're calling for negotiations as a sign of weakness rather than a sign of willingness to compromise, which is what it is. So there is a misreading of intentions here. And that is why it is important that the United States remain firm on showing that it is capable and still willing to use force, but that it is offering, a ladder out of this tree, so to speak, for the Iranians to come down and accept a deal that will, at the very least, limit the program, let the regime survive a little more. And there's a trade-off in that, but that's the best it seems that the United States is going to be able to achieve at this time.
And Relik, we saw the Islamic Republic also respond once again, firing missiles at Kuwait, at Bahrain. This seems to have been normalized almost by the United States as well, that they have yet to respond to the Iranian response against Bahrain and Kuwait. Has the U.S. sort of abandoned its Gulf allies in this? I mean, what can you tell us about the situation with regards to the Gulf allies and their take in all of this?
Yes, well, the Gulf states have always been afraid of Iran, and Iran has always said that if attacked, they will hit U.S. interests in the Gulf states. They haven't said they'll close the Straits of Hormuz, but they have prepared a series of sea mines that the commander of CENTCOM, who previously was commander of the Fifth Fleet, which is in that area, knew well about. So their weapons, and they're weaponizing their ability to terrorize those states, close the straits, raise the price of oil, and put the Gulf states in harm's way, or maybe you should use a pun, in the very dire straits. And that applies a lot of pressure in the United States, that while they attacked many of the assets of the U.S., over 20 of them, along the Gulf. So the United States does not have a very good answer to these threats without going into serious war against Iran. And the states are even more afraid that Iran will dissolve into a sovereign state that is not really governed by a central government, and may even break up into different sects. And that may terrorize the area even more than it is right now, and there'll be nobody to talk to. And that scares a lot of those states, and even Turkey. So in order to get this thing checked, it's a very, I would say, a delicate balance between walk with a big stick and speak softly, which is the 1906 policy dictated at the time by President Roosevelt, not FDR, but Teddy Roosevelt, his uncle, who had this kind of a strategy against the Southern American uprising, and is that they're actually applying it right now to the Middle East. so far without great success.
And Dan, back to you. In this latest escalation, after we saw the U.S. strikes, where do we stand now with regards to the ongoing negotiations over the MOU?
Well, there's, a 60-day period that was agreed on. We're about 50 days into it, and there's going to be a lot of pushing. The Iranians, as Relik here said, they're very good at negotiation, and they're going to use every tool in their box, including raising the pressure. This is part of what these strikes are about, to show that they're the boss, that they're raising the pressure, to throw in red herrings into the negotiations that can be then taken out of the negotiations. That's what control of the Hormuz was, something they can throw in that then they can bargain about and achieve a victory that was never supposed to be part of the original game. So they're going to be looking for ways to crash the negotiations, to raise the temperature around the region, to escalate against U.S. allies, such as in the Gulf states, in order to improve their bargaining position. And the United States here has to be very careful with this, and to understand that this is all part of the regime's negotiating ploys to keep the pressure up. And the United States has really a number of ways to do this, and it shouldn't release the money without very achievable and definitive gains from the Iranians, concessions from the Iranians. And they need to keep the Hormuz open. They can bring back, the closure of the Hormuz that put a lot of economic pressure on Iran. And these occasional military threats, with the threat of escalation, is something that needs to be, to keep the Iranians fire at their feet, in order to make sure that they remain committed to this process of the negotiation, which, even if it works out according to what we understand from administration officials, is not going to be a whole lot better than the JCPOA. And so they need to keep focused to at least, at the very minimum, achieve what they claimed they were going to achieve when this 60-day MOU was announced.
And Alec, we've talked about the U.S., we've talked about Iran, but what is Israel's position in all of this? I think you mentioned Israelis here gritting their teeth. Prime Minister Netanyahu says striking Iran alone, if necessary, is not off the table. So where does Israel stand in all of this?
Well, Israel, of course, can strike Iran, I would say almost at will, if it were not for the United States stopping it from doing so. But given the Iranian resoluteness and ability to withstand a lot of pressure without hitting things like the electrical systems and shutting down light in Tehran and Isfahan and causing this kind of damage, there's not much chance that they would capitulate. So with all due respect to ourselves, our ability to put pressure so that the Iranians will change their mind is very limited. And I would not wonder if they invite us to do so in order to create some kind of an emergency by firing a couple of missiles, or maybe sending the Houthis to do so from the south in order to involve us in the picture and put pressure on us while we're trying to resolve our problems in Lebanon. So if we put too much pressure on Lebanon, I would expect some missiles to be flying over. This will continue certainly until November. Or to put pressure on the United States as they see that Israel and the United States maybe are at some kind of a quarrel. So I would expect more trouble until something happens. Either President Trump is pressed so hard that he has to strike really hard, or we're through the November elections, and that would be a new game at that time.
And Dan, back to you, turning now to Lebanon. So Israel and Lebanon signed this framework agreement in Washington over the weekend. It's meant to leave Hezbollah and the Islamic regime out of the equation, out of the picture. Now, there's been agreements similar, signed like this in the past that have essentially amounted to nothing. Hezbollah was supposed to remain above the Litani River. Of course, it clearly has not. But what is different this time around in this new agreement that's being hailed as sort of a game changer here in Israel?
Yeah, we've had a number of these kinds of agreements. You're right, but there are a couple things that are very different here that are worth paying attention to. First of all, American leadership is one of them, and this is the first time that the Americans have taken a clear role. Notice the French are not involved in this. Secondly, this is also a direct response to Iran's attempt to create linkage between the U.S.-Iran track and the Lebanon-Israel track, and it's very important for both Israel and for the Americans in this case. They're backing Israel to make sure that linkage is not created, so that Hezbollah doesn't get a break based on what's happening between the U.S. and Iran. And the biggest one, though, the biggest difference that we have here is that Israel is not expected to withdraw from this security strip under the yellow line, as it appears on the maps, this security strip that's a few kilometers into South Lebanon, without a clear and capable replacement of LAF, Lebanese Armed Forces, coming in, taking over, and making sure that the area is clean from Hezbollah. So it's a phased approach that's contingent, at least it's supposed to be contingent, on the performance and the willingness of the Lebanese state and the Lebanese armed forces to ensure Hezbollah doesn't come back into those areas, and not what we've had in the past where Israel is just supposed to withdraw and let's hope that everything goes well. I'll say just two more kind of sentences about the bigger atmosphere, which is different here. This is an atmosphere in which Iran is relatively weakened. Its entire proxy array has been, I don't want to say completely shattered, but severely weakened compared to previous rounds of escalation and fighting. And secondly, you have here within the Lebanese political system, within Lebanese society, for the first time, the state itself and significant elements of the population are speaking out openly against Hezbollah, the need for Hezbollah to disarm, the need to enact state sovereignty and authority, that only the state will control arms and the use of arms and force within the Lebanese state. And so the zones, the kind of tying Israeli withdrawal to actual performance and not just a wish list, a nice to have list, but also the context, the regional context, the internal Lebanese context are quite different than in previous agreements here.
And Relik, do we know what the capabilities of Hezbollah are today? Do we have any idea how many fighters they have left, what their missile capacity is, and so on? Do we have a picture of this now, nearly, I would say, 3 years since October 7th and since Israel has been at war with Hezbollah?
Are you asking me or Relik here?
Relik, I'm asking Relik this.
Well, I would venture to say that this is almost irrelevant. As long as they can fire, let's say, one missile per day, and we will have, let's say, one casualty, fatality per week or so, that is enough to put pressure on Israel for their purpose. So they don't really need a barrage of rockets, and they don't need to fire at Israel at all. They need to fire at our soldiers in South Lebanon in order to put pressure on the Israeli politicians and public, and that pressure will translate into friction with the United States that wants to to pacify the area. And the pressure on Netanyahu to go into military moves is going to mount, even if there are just one or two rockets a day. So they don't need a large number of thousands because we're talking about terror rather than a war. So that ability will be maintained. Doesn't matter how much pressure we put on and how successful the Lebanese army is. That will stay put that way. So I'm afraid we'll have to grit our teeth And with the upcoming elections in Israel, it's going to play a major part in the quarrel between the political parties come October and obviously come November in the United States. So it's not a question of numbers. It's a question of the ability to irritate Israel so that it cannot really show that it was able to overcome Hezbollah.
To go back to a point that you made. You talked about sort of this new phased approach with the Lebanese army, but I want to ask again how this is any different because we've heard for years that the Lebanese army or that many people within the Lebanese army are sympathetic to Hezbollah, and the Lebanese army was essentially supposed to clear out southern Lebanon from Hezbollah this past decade or so. They clearly were unwilling or incapable to do so. So how is this going to work this time around? Or is this set up, once again for failure?
It's not a guaranteed success, I'll say that. But it is in a better position for success, and success can be gradual here than in previous incidents. So Hezbollah is definitely weaker than it once was. We saw over the last year between the end of 2025 and 2026 that it is capable of rebuilding itself quite quickly. It is a very disciplined organization in that regard. By the way, American economic and financial pressure on Iran greatly affects Hezbollah's financial situation, its ability to pay fighters and recruit fighters, and it is having a hard time with it. A number of fighters, close to 3,000 of its fighters have been killed in this last few months of fighting. Its missile stores, a lot of its underground stores, but as Relik said, it has a lot of capability, and all it has to be able to do is even fire a few missiles and harass. Hezbollah is weaker. And the Lebanese army is still not strong enough, but that's why I think the phased approach has more potential, right? So it's not expected to come in and take all of South Lebanon in one swoop. And Israel is doing a lot of the work of weakening Hezbollah in the process. And so it's more of Israel doing the dirty work and handing it over. I'm not sure how much sympathy there is within the LAF these days for Hezbollah. That said, it's also very hard for me to see it directly engaging in combat with Hezbollah fighters, and it would be more of sort of a pressure and a negotiation and Israel weakening them at the same time, rather than any kind of expectation that the LAF will come in and confront Hezbollah forces directly, which would, hard for me to imagine them wanting to do it and being really capable of doing that. But as long as that pressure, the financial pressure on one side, the state pressure on the other side, the entire Lebanese state system, and a lot of the Shia actually in Lebanon are speaking out and blaming Hezbollah for their misery now. Add to that Israel degrading their actual capabilities in the south and pushing them up north. And then if you can create this phased approach with these pilot zones where Israel clears an area, and then the LAF needs to come in under perhaps here American supervision and ensure that Hezbollah doesn't come back in. It gives you a much better chance. But certainly this is no guarantee that it will actually succeed. We have seen in the past under UNIFIL that Hezbollah comes back in and constitutes itself right under the nose of international forces. So we have to be ever vigilant here. I do think this agreement is a step forward. I think the statements that were made and expressed towards a political track, towards what Lebanon is expected to do and what Lebanon intends to do within Lebanon are a progression here, and they need to be encouraged, but certainly nothing is given.
I'm gonna stop you there because we are out of time. I want to thank both you and Relik for joining us on this edition of ILTV. Thank you both so much.
Glad to.
Thank you.